Satisfy diners' cravings with Smithfield Culinary. From smokin' fast, fully cooked or hardwood smoked proteins, to Margarita's specialty Italian meats products, to Smithfield, pleasing meat lovers everywhere, we've got you covered. To learn more, call 844-673-2688.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Extra Serving, a podcast from Nation's Restaurant News. I'm Sam Oches, editor-in-chief of NRN, joined by my colleague, Alicia Kelso, executive editor. Alicia, hello. Welcome back to Real Life.
If that's what you want to call it, yes.
Yeah, I was rewatching a clip from our episode last week, and I had that hideous curtain behind me because I was in my hotel room and had no choice but to put it behind me. I'm back in my normal backdrop, my normal cluttered, messy backdrop. As are you. And we are back from the National Restaurant Association show.
Physically,
mentally, we're still there. 6 days in Chicago. I was there, I guess 5 days for you. Look, we previewed it last week. We told you all this is is a bear. It's the biggest event of the year, and it is very taxing, but it is very, very productive in the information we gather, sort of the status check on the industry, the people we connect with. Alicia, what were some of the key takeaways that you brought with the show?
Yeah, my key takeaways were beverages. We talked about this last year because I would peruse the floor last year. Like, gosh, there's a lot of boba. But this year it was more pronounced. It was not just boba. It was dirty sodas, energy drinks everywhere, non-alcoholic / mocktails, THC drinks definitely were more pervasive this year than last year. But also on the tech side, there was a lot more beverage-specific technology. There were like automated bartenders and mixologists, things that made sure that your pours were consistent, for operations that are adding like dirty sodas, making sure that was a consistent add-on. The mixers were consistent, so on and so forth. I just was taken away by how much more of a spotlight beverages took up this year versus last year. And last year was huge, but it corroborates with our reporting. The other thing that, on the menu side, sauces and dips and spreads everywhere. Plant-based was less pronounced from where I'm sitting. I thought that it had been growing pretty consistently for about the past 8 or so years, but this year it seemed more retrenched. Which, I guess corroborates with our reporting as well. But it also seems weird because have noticed that the quality of these plant-based products throughout the years has gotten significantly better. On the tech side, there was AI integration everywhere, voice AI, camera AI. Operators were talking about, how to get away maybe from their legacy point of sale systems. Lots of interest in loyalty programs. Again, corroborating with our reporting, and integration was a huge word. I think the operators that I talked to are basically like, we know AI is here to stay. Last year, we weren't sure what it meant. This year, we know it's here to stay. We know we need it. We need to know how. And a lot of that came back to data. Operators have been sitting on all this consumer data for so long. And AI, I think, is the solution that's going to help them make sense of that consumer data to better communicate and present themselves in front of those consumers.
Totally. Yeah, I second all of that. Beverages, absolutely. Yeah, it's interesting because last year it was a little bit more specifically through the lens of boba, to your point. And this year it was, dirty soda, hello. The 3 big beverage providers in Coca-Cola, Keurig Dr. Pepper, and Pepsi, those 3 each had a very strong emphasis on dirty soda specifically. So once it is with the big guys, that this trend is very pervasive. But I think to your point, the diversity of beverages, Dr. Pepper, there was Dr. Pepper milkshakes. Coca-Cola, certainly had, there was a root beer, it was a root beer float with Coke that was amazing. I had to keep going back to. And so, but I think that just to drill in a little bit more closely on what the point you're making here is personalization, right? Because you mentioned sauces and dips. 100%. If you go to the Kraft Heinz booth, they had basically the freestyle for condiments where you could mix your own condiment. I never got a chance to do it because the line was always so long and I'm just a very impatient person. But the personalization with, what dirty sodas represents as far as personalization goes, personalizing your dips, there is no doubt in my mind this is the direction we're heading, at least for the time being, where you're trying to get some excitement with your customers. You need traffic back. And, you can develop a whole new menu item, or you can, pad your menu with beverages and sauces at a much more cost effective way. And then if you invite adventure in those beverages and sauces by having personalization, by having some new flavors they haven't tried, then you don't have to go the whole way of developing a whole new menu item, possibly bringing on some new SKUs, possibly developing a whole, a whole supply chain around it. So that was very interesting to me. And it's so funny you say that with the plant-based too, because while plant-based was down, I thought organic and natural seemed to be up. And so, I mean, not to harp on this too much, because I know I talk about this a lot, but if you really want to just sort of parallel everything happening right now to what happened after the recession, it's fascinating because when fast casual took off, it was because people wanted personalization and a DIY experience. What also took off then? Health and wellness. And you just see the same kind of trends happening now. And I think, like, I told a lot of people at the show, what you see coming out of a period of intense value is a period of intense quality and adventure in menus. And I see us going in the same direction. It'll be a different flavor of it, right? The health movement will be different. It won't be maybe plant-based and, whatever the trend du jour was 15 years ago, but it is going to be, better for you. I, went into Von Miller, former Super Bowl MVP, was there with a new chicken product, humanely raised, organic, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, all of the qualifications a good chicken can have. And, tasted it. It was very tasty. And it's like, it's still fried chicken, but the way it was raised was better. We see, certainly, if you look at the administration, RFK, what he's doing, like there is a tension on this idea of fewer additives, fewer, et cetera, right? So all of those 100% co-sign. Technology, it feels like there is a little bit more of a actual practical application with things like AI and robotics versus the, hey, look, we've got a robot. So I do think it was encouraging. We've talked enough about uncertainty and, the sales slide and traffic issues. Those are still very much real, by the way. But it felt like at least maybe there was a little bit more optimism than I expected at the show. And I think some genuinely practical tools on display that can help folks get through this next season. So on the whole, lots of interesting stuff at the National Restaurant Show. Last point I'll make too. I think I previewed this last week, but we hosted on the Friday before the show started this CIO Nest event. Again, the Nests are our small group community for the industry where, based on your title, you become a part of a group, meet virtually, and have an opportunity to connect in person at events. We hosted our first ever kind of ancillary event with a show, and that was for CIOs. And I got to participate in that and participate in some roundtables with the CTO, CIO of some fairly large companies. And it's fascinating to listen to them talk about this stuff because you think these guys have it all figured out. They're, some of their brands had 1,000 locations and more, but they don't all have it figured out because this is a rapidly innovating, changing industry. And the technology in particular is constantly adapting, evolving, enhancing. And they are all taking it as they go. But some of the brands didn't even have loyalty programs. Some of the brands didn't know what to do with data. Integration was a big, big factor for all of them because they all want to go with the best in breed tech tool, not the one-stop shop, because one-stop shop ends up doing something not very well for you. So it's a really interesting gauge on where we stand in the industry, but it's just important to emphasize collaborating with peers, learning what's out there in the industry, getting your eyes on some of the tools available to you will help you get a leg up for the future. Let's talk about the headlines. Let's dive into, first up, Darden. Darden, on the heels of announcing that it was going to close 15 Bahama Breeze locations, just announced they're closing 2 Seasons 52 locations. Look, not perhaps a huge surprise in this climate. We, of course, know that Denny's announced they would close locations. Jack in the Box Del Taco talking about closing locations. Darden, though, is interesting. Darden, here is the real titan of full service and fine dining too, as far as chain fine dining goes. They have like half of America's favorite brands, as according to our America's Favorite Chains report, and yet they still are really on the struggle bus right now. What's going on at Darden, Alicia?
I don't know that Darden's hugely on the struggle bus because they're so diversified, and like you said, they've got to be one of the best operators in the business. But to see some of these, closures on the heels of Bahama Breeze was a bigger shock because that was a big chunk of their system for Bahama Breeze. It is a little surprising, but it also isn't when you zoom out and sort of look at the context. So the newest brands into Darden's portfolio are Chewy's and Ruth's Chris, right? Cash cows compared to Bahama Breeze and Seasons 52. Chewy's had a great year in 2024 and outpaced the industry almost double, 5.8% up on sales. So, and Ruth's Chris is about flat last year, given a softer macroeconomic, backdrop. That is pretty impressive, I think, for a high-end concept when consumers were pulling back. So I have to wonder, if Darden is just doing this, moving pieces around in its portfolio to sharpen its focus on its stronger brands. Now, is it going to close down all the Bahama Breezes or Seasons 52? Probably not. I'm sure there are, strong units in those systems. Seasons 52 was up 1.7 last year. Bahama Breeze, though, was down 7.7%. So it did not, it still grew 2.3% up to 44 units, but, now it's retrenched again. So, you have to wonder if this is just a new puzzle for Darden, that it's just moving pieces around. Could it potentially convert some of these Bahama Breezes into Chewy's, which is doing really well? Me thinks yes. And that's one of the benefits of having such a diversified portfolio. If you notice that, one of your brands is underperforming in a specific market, you have the opportunity to do more than just close and walk away. And of course, we've talked at length on this podcast about how closures aren't necessarily always a bad thing. Multiple brands are pursuing, a retrenchment right now to get back to healthier growth, from everyone from Red Robin and Noodles and Denny's, Burger King and Wendy's, it's across segments. But you look at that Bahama Breeze again last year, and it was definitely a weak piece of the puzzle for Darden last year. So you have to wonder if they're going to pursue, like I said, a conversion strategy here.
It's interesting with Bahama Breeze. I mean, that is a very experiential brand. It is a vibe, if you will, the Margaritaville of the Darden portfolio. And I'm surprised in a time when people are looking for experience, that perhaps consumers are not rushing off to Bahama Breeze. Of course, multifaceted issues, so can't easily pinpoint that. But yeah, I mean, maybe now is as good as time as any to rip the Band-Aid off and just say, okay, well, things are down right now across the board for the industry. Perhaps now more than ever, we need to course correct, streamline our operation, or optimize our operation here and pursue stronger growth. As I said, other chains have been announcing their intentions to do just that. And where it's easy to pounce on the chain closes location, very easy headline for us to jump on. And by the way, I just have to tell you that those headlines tend to do the best for us. Not, hey, we're not chasing the ambulance here, but people are very interested in when restaurants are closing locations. And so that's why they don't want to put a big emphasis on, we're closing locations, but we're doing it for good. We promise. Not to shameless plug here, but I will. Our Kelly Valade conversation is up. Our signature episode with Kelly Valade. Highly recommend you go to nrn.com. You will see it there on the homepage. Scroll down a little bit. You'll see there's a video interview with her. We'll have another video next week as well. And we have the Q&A. But point is like Kelly specifically told me, she was like, I hated that when we announced closures, that media really kind of, sank their teeth into that part of it and not the part of it as to why we were doing it, which is that this is to not save the brand, but to improve the brand. We genuinely believe doing this is better for the company as a whole. And sometimes those decisions have to be made. So, yes.
I hope she pointed out that you and I contextualized that.
Certainly did right there in front of her.
So. Beyond the headline with Sam and Alicia.
And I know who I hate, that media. I hate
pesky journalists.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, the point here is that I think we should probably expect to see other companies that are similarly going to be making some difficult decisions.
Yeah.
There will be that retrenchment, but it's ultimately to put a better foot forward, certainly on the other side of this rocky economic climate.
Yeah, if I can jump in really, really quickly to tidy this up with a bow. I can't even count how many conversations with operators, in Chicago, which is why my voice is a little scratchy, but and more than less said, we're oversaturated in our industry. And I think that has come to a head in particular with the loss of traffic. I think that's come to a head in particular with the retrenchment of units. We just have too many restaurants, and we're seeing what happens. We're seeing a course correction here. Couple that with the fact that we don't have a robust population growth right now in this country, and that trend is expected for the foreseeable future. So the industry really has to have some come to Jesus moments, conversations, whatever, about where it needs to be. And that's going to really push forward the bifurcation, who wins and who loses. But like you said, the companies that can identify they're underperforming to get back to the net new unit growth, I think are going to be well positioned in that wonky environment.
Defining growth is going to be important too, right? What is growth to you and your company? I had at least one conversation this weekend with somebody who was talking about they had a handful of locations, and that was okay. And I think they felt a little pressure to have some unit expansion, but they were on the fence. As I told them, like, if you don't want to be traveling between markets all the time and you just want to explore growth within the four walls, that's okay too. Like, growth comes in many different formats, right? There's unit expansion, there's growth expansion, four wall expansion. You could do, you could grow in a lot of different ways. And so I do think at this point in time, the industry maybe needs to take a step back and recognize growth should happen within the four walls before it happens externally and market to market, because and let's just jump right in. We don't have to dig in too much into this, but Fitch has downgraded the restaurant industry forecast for this year. Initially had forecasted flat or slightly positive growth. Now is forecasting slightly negative growth. Not a surprise here. That's why we don't need to spend too much time on it, but it is significant, when an institution such as Fitch is saying, okay, whoa, things are not great. Anything else we should learn from that, Alicia?
I hate the word deteriorating.
Yeah.
It's ominous, isn't it? But no, Fitch identified everything that we've identified in our reporting, everything that we've identified with the conversations that we've had with the folks in the trenches, and everything that we've identified on this podcast and elsewhere. There's a confluence of bad things happening right now in the industry. In what I think was really standing out to me with this Fitch report is, we know that consumer sentiment is down. We know it fell off a cliff in Q1. Every month in Q1, we are down to levels not seen on consumer sentiment since the early 1980s. That bodes, terrifying for the restaurant industry, which is highly discretionary. Inflation is expected to continue to be relentless. We are seeing some relief on egg prices, but the conversations I had on the floor and what we're seeing in some of these reports I get in my inbox, beef prices are ticking up very, very quickly. Chicken prices are also ticking up very, very quickly. I have to point to McDonald's probably pressuring that supply chain a little bit with their McCrispy strips. I can't imagine a company at that scale getting into chicken that way. Fitch also recognized that immigration policies and the uncertainties around immigration policies are a major cause of concern. Our industry employs about 20 to 25% immigrants. So this could very negatively, impact the labor supply and push those costs up even more than they've been, in the past couple of years, which are historical highs. Mix that in with the policy uncertainty of tariffs, not just food, but equipment, lumber, everything that is required to grow. And we've got a bit of a storm happening, and this Fitch downgrade came, I think it's worth noting, this Fitch downgrade came on the heels of Technomic, downsizing its outlook as well from what they expected of just above 5% to 3.5% to just above 4%. So it's a confluence of us. It's like a perfect storm, unfortunately, but
Yeah. And as we know, uncertainty remains our favorite word of the
I
year.
was trying to get people to do a drinking game with me on the show floor every time somebody says uncertainty, but I don't,
I think
nobody was,
uncertainty should be the word of every year because it's such an easy excuse. I'm uncertain.
yeah, well,
I
who
should know.
knows?
I don't
I
know.
say it every morning when I wake up. I'm uncertain.
Well, when our bosses come to us and say, "Hey, where's this thing?" I am uncertain about that. I can't tell you either way. Sorry. Okay, well, let's get into McDonald's. You mentioned them. McDonald's, just like all the other burger guys, are struggling for sure. Of course, their latest quarter, I believe they were down 2% and change. But McDonald's is doing something significant, which is it is going to be open for late night hours. Many locations going to be staying open until midnight or possibly even later. Now, this comes on the heels of a hiring push. They announced they would hire 375,000 employees to beef up their workforce. Now we see maybe why they're doing that is to expand their operating hours. They're celebrating with free merchandise and free cookie strips and all kinds of fun things. I think I saw Beyonce and Kendrick Lamar in there too.
Uh,
Things that McDonald's is capable of doing. Um, we've covered this industry a long time, Alicia. I still remember when Wendy's went to late night hours. Taco Bell's had some luck with late night hours. McDonald's doing late night hours. What do we make of that?
Yeah, I thought this was really interesting. I think many McDonald's restaurants had late night hours prior to the pandemic, but as we know, operational hours, were pulled back significantly during that and continued because of that labor shortage following the pandemic. This announcement impacts a vast majority of its restaurants. So the ones that don't extend their hours in this are those in like airports and malls that really don't have the capability of extending it. I think it's really interesting too that prior to this announcement, the restaurants, the handful of restaurants that were open into late night offered a pretty limited menu. And with this announcement, the vast majority of restaurants that are extending into late night will offer a majority of the menu into those wee hours. So there's a lot of operational movement that comes with this. To your point, we now understand why that ambitious hiring number of 375,000 employees, will support this, as well as its, anticipated 900 or so domestic restaurants that it's targeting in the next 2 or so years. I think what I think is interesting after, diving into their earnings report and stuff, McDonald's has been down for 2 quarters straight, which is really weird and rare for that company. We can really attribute Q4 a lot of that negativity to the E. coli outbreak in October. McDonald's is fully recovered from that. So then we have to zoom into Q1 and understand what's happening here. For the first time in Q1, executives noted that not just lower income consumers are staying on the sidelines, but now middle income consumers have been, recognized as not coming in as often. Chris Kempczinski, the CEO, said that breakfast has really been impacted, more consumers. And that's 25% of McDonald's business. It's very profitable. McDonald's is a breakfast juggernaut, and so when you have your strongest day part or one of your strongest day parts, definitely the most profitable day part, experiencing softness, then, you probably have to find some pieces elsewhere. And late night has had a surge really since 2023 when we started recovering a little bit from that labor shortage. We saw Jack in the Box, Wendy's, White Castle, Denny's really pushing their late night business because they finally had the labor to fulfill it. It's the hardest labor, day part to fill, but they finally, we finally recovered from that labor shortage. White Castle, put a bunch of investments into beefing up their labor for late night, marketed aggressively toward it. I know Jack in the Box got Snoop Dogg involved in their late night promotion. So it's part of that ebb and flow where breakfast is really down right now. I think traffic in breakfast in April was down like 8%. It was down high single digits, according to Revenue Management Solutions. So you got to find how to fulfill that, at least part of that void. And I think this could explain away some of that.
Yeah, and post-pandemic, I think consumer behavior is a lot harder to pin down. It's a lot less predictable. We don't have the 3 traditional day parts anymore. Obviously, the drive-through coffee places are another good barometer of that. But like the drive-through coffee place is a good barometer of that too, because they do a lot of their business late morning and afternoon, and you would think a coffee place, of course, they do the bulk of their business in the morning. But because, work from home changed a lot of things, because in general, consumers just changed the way they live life in the pandemic, and they came out of the pandemic and suddenly are, driving everywhere. And that's where convenience and drive-through became so important. But it just scrambled, I think, the traditional experience with restaurants, that traditional 3-day part rule. And so breakfast was not just breakfast, it was brunch too, because suddenly, the late morning was just as important as the early morning. And then you have snack places and beverage places capitalizing on afternoon. And now we see this really coming to fruition or coming full circle with late night. So there's no surprise here. And yes, to your point, if breakfast is going to be soft, you got to make up for it somewhere. Now, the next thing I would expect is to see McDonald's start to develop some deals and menu items around late night, because that's the one thing they didn't really say. They just said, oh yeah, we're going to be open later. But okay, what's going to get me to come to McDonald's late night aside from just being a night owl? Well, it might get me there if there is some sort of a discount, some sort of value meal, some sort of new item that's hot on social media that you can only get after 9 p.m. or something along those lines. I would expect to see that next, because, otherwise you're just going to see a lot of McDonald's in heavy walking traffic areas, more heavily urban areas. They will thrive on late night. But how do you get somebody to go through the drive-through in the suburbs in a McDonald's at 11:30? That's going to be the thing I think they'll have to figure out next. All right, next and last, we'll talk about Portillo. As you and I slowly sink into our cold deterioration. Portillo's, where I was on Tuesday, I had the pleasure of trying the breakfast menu at Portillo's alongside our colleagues. This was funny because I never thought about this, but we were there filming a video. When we told the video team our names, I said, I'm Sam. And then it was Joanna, Jonathan, Joe. We got a lot of J's on our team, guys. But yes, Joanna Fantozzi from our team, Jonathan Mays, and Joe Guskowski from RB. We were all in a Portillo's filming a video, which was a lot of fun, mostly because I got to try the new Portillo's breakfast menu. And as I told you before we started, Alicia, I thought it was delicious and wonderful. But to have it on the day 6 of 6 in Chicago after 6 solid days of eating and drinking, I was like, okay, maybe I'll run extra over the next week. Not kid ourselves, I don't run. But it was very, very tasty. Portillo's, of course, launched their breakfast test in 5 locations. Now Portillo's is announcing they are going to get into the non-traditional space, starting with an airport location at Dallas-Fort Worth Airport. This is notable because Portillo's is known for these massive locations. We were at one at Canal and Taylor in Chicago, which is 2 stories, gorgeous, incredible, memorabilia all around. It's a vibe inside of Portillo's, as most people know. But now they're going to scale down. Do we think this is a good move for Portillo's?
Yeah, they have to scale down. If they want to grow, they are targeting pretty aggressively growth in the Sun Belt in particular, which is really smart because that's where everybody's going. They're a Chicago staple. A lot of retirees from, the Snow Belt move to the markets that they're looking at. But when they opened their new prototype in Houston at the end of 2024, their chief financial officer, Michelle Hook, was telling me at ICR in January that saved like $1 million+ dollars. So just trimming that down, no surprise. That's what companies are doing now. We don't need that big of a box with off-prem. Staying and lingering and hovering about that 20% range, across the industry. We don't need the huge space for those, big boxes anymore. And it saves a bunch of money. So non-traditional markets, I think, is a logical next step. And especially for a concept like Portillo's, they're experimenting with these walk-up windows. I think that fits the concept really, really well. They sell hot dogs. They sell, carry out type, to go type food.
It started as a walk-up window,
They did. Yeah. So these smaller locations, I think, are just such a smart move for them as they target, these ambitious growth plans. Airports, I think airports are the way to go if you want to extend brand awareness. What I'm really intrigued about is Portillo's has staggeringly high average unit volumes.
Yeah.
I think they're higher than Chick-fil-A.
They're at 8 or 9 million.
9 million or something. Right. So what's this airport location in DFW going to yield? It's going to be fun to watch. But Portillo's is throwing a lot against the wall now. And I think all of it really makes a lot of sense. They're testing kiosks, they're testing, video at the drive-through to make that process quicker. Because they're not known for their speed and they want to. Like you mentioned, they're testing this breakfast concept. That'll bode well, by the way, if they expand to more airports. And so all of these pieces will come, into place, I think, soon. And I think this company it's on a rocket ship right now.
I'm a little surprised they are not in O'Hare and that they're not starting at O'Hare. For all I know, they used to be at O'Hare. I don't know. But that would be a slam dunk. I mean, airports we've all seen over the last decade have really moved toward more personality in their brands and certainly more local brands. You see a lot of airports emphasizing those local operators coming in and saying, hey, Columbus and Louisville, here's what you get. Here's a taste of it in the airport, right? And so I'm surprised that's why Portillo's is not at O'Hare, because they would probably crush. There's only so much Garrett popcorn you can eat at O'Hare, right? Like, let's get a Portillo's up in there. Gives you some real character. But just to emphasize what you're saying, I think the smaller format, like this is what we see in so many. It's what we see in these brands that are going with the shipping container model. It's what we see in the drive-through coffee. It's what we see a lot of brands trying to figure out, how do I get a very replicable small box so I can punch these into little parts of the country. And if you figure out that, then you've figured out non-traditional. I mean, of course, there's nuance to sort of traffic patterns and things. But all around, if you have a 4,000 square foot, if your typical build is a 4,000 square foot box, you should be thinking about what's a sub 2,000 version of this that I can put into developments I wouldn't otherwise look at, because it gets back to what we were talking about with saturation and growth. If you want to grow your footprint and the only developments coming available to you are too small for what you've typically done, you should start figuring out how to still get in there, because it's good for brand awareness. You might get into a development or property that has heavy foot traffic, and all around you could just learn a lot about yourself as a brand.
Yeah. And so many brands are doing this right now. So many brands, even McDonald's, El Pollo Loco, Chick-fil-A, they're all pursuing smaller prototypes to do exactly that and to diversify their portfolio. What I like about this is it diversifies the portfolio for franchisees. Franchisees, I don't necessarily want to open an 8,000 square foot box anymore. It's very costly to do that. You need very high AUVs to maintain that. And so I think this makes a lot of concepts much sexier to open it up for more franchisees and help with their profitability, of course, which is the North Star.
That's right. All right, Alicia, we've played our voices out enough. I think it's time to give them a rest. It's Friday. You and I are entering Memorial Day. Lightning round. What do you got on deck?
I've got my kids got a basketball game, a soccer game, and a hockey game. I otherwise hope to recover. It's going to be kind of not great weather here in Louisville. I would love to float in a pool, but I don't know if that's in the cards for me. I'm too old to deal with cold water.
The real trend Chicago, the show traffic was all over the place because weather impacted just about everybody's flight. It was really wild.
It was weird.
We've got a cold snap here. My kids had the coldest last day of school yesterday, 55 degrees, yet they still had their water balloon and water slide party in the neighborhood. So yeah, similarly, I'm going to try to get some sleep, Alicia. We've been at it for a long time now. That's all we've got for Extra Serving. I'm Sam Oches, editor-in-chief of NRN. She's Alicia Kelso, executive editor. We'll talk to you next week.
Satisfy diners' cravings with Smithfield Culinary. From smoking fast, fully cooked or hardwood smoked proteins, to Margarita's specialty Italian meats products, to Smithfield, pleasing meat lovers everywhere, we've got you covered. To learn more, call 844-673-2688.